We've spoken about thermal regulation already and how critical it is in the order of operations for our priorities of survival. Now I'd like to demonstrate how to make a proper shelter in order to take care of our warmth, particularly in the evening times. So when we begin, the first thing we want to do is account for our duff bed. Duff can be any type of dry material that has lots of loft. An example might be pine needles, dry leaves, dry grasses, anything to get us off the ground and hold on to that dead air space so that any heat that we're radiating remains within the ground below us, which is not the immediate ground, but this bed that we've created. So when you begin with your shelter, the first thing you need to do is make this bed so that you know how long and how wide it needs to be. So if I was this stick, we'll say that this is my bed. Now, one thing that people often forget when they're making duff beds is that we also need a duff comforter. And so I would use the exact same materials, gather them and place them on top of me for my comforter. So if this is approximately the size of our bed and comforter, which, by the way, if you did not have time to actually create a shelter, this type of material works to shed rain and wind and water, so you could just slide on underneath, and if this is big enough, if you collected enough of this material, you could actually stay dry and warm without sort of the housing to go with it. But if you have the time, of course, it's nice to continue to make things sturdier. So the first thing that I'll do is my campsite selection has been chosen. Let's say that my bed is faced this way and I need something very sturdy. A Y shape is a really nice top to have, because this is where I'm going to have my ridge line coming down. I want to make sure that this piece in particular is 100% not going anywhere. If this collapses, my ridge line will collapse and the rest of the shelter will topple on me, which is dangerous and unnecessary. So do whatever you need to do, surround this with rocks, tie rope to it in other directions to make sure that it's secure. The next thing we'll do is find a proper ridge line. This ridge line should also be quite sturdy and as straight as possible. It will go over top of me, making sure that I have plenty of room in my bed with some, extra space so that I don't feel too claustrophobic. The higher my ridge line, the more air I'll have in. Perhaps it's not really, really cold outside, so I don't need it to be as tight. The colder it is outside, the more compact you want this shelter to be, so that the elements are not able to travel inside as easily. So presuming that it's fairly cold outside, I'm going to make a ridge line that gives me an area so I can sit up and be a little bit comfortable, but ultimately doesn't let too much wind in. My next step is going to be to build the side walls off of the ridge line. And let me back up one step. This ridge line likewise needs to be backed by something. So I could put a large rock here, I could back it up to a tree, but I don't want this stick moving at all. So that's really important. The sticks that I have, obviously this is just a small demo. I want these to be not too heavy, but I also want them to be sturdy as well. And so what I'll do is just begin by putting sticks kind of along the side. These don't have to be too close together if you're going to be adding debris to the top. If you're short on debris, I wouldn't leave so much airspace in between them. So it might look something like this, sort of the skeleton of our structure. One thing that I could also do, if my ridge line were sticking out a little bit more, would be to build perhaps like in this direction, coming around the front, which isn't necessarily where I'm going to be sleeping, but it gives me storage space for my gear to also protect it from the elements. So I could do something like that, and I still have an entranceway, which I can block off with duff material when I'm finally ready. And I'll show you how I do that when we build this large and live. The next step is going to be to add the insulation. This could be done with a lot of different things. I have pine needles, so of course this could be done with pine needles. One thing to remember is that if I start from the top, these are just going to slide down. So we'll begin at the bottom and add our insulation in a layering method towards the ridge line. Any holes are of course an issue. This is what's going to let your wind in, your rain in. The more the merrier. The more duff you have, the warmer you're going to be. So it might look something like that. I want to make sure I get these bottom edges. Other materials I could use is juniper bark. It's all over the place. We're in a pinyon juniper zone right now. This would be a little bit more of a higher mountain zone where we have our ponderosa pine needles. In this case, I can do the exact same thing, simply shingling it, sort of layering it from the bottom and moving my way upward, leaving as few holes as possible, and continuing to add material as I find it, depending upon how long I'll be staying and how cold it is outside. And of course I can use a combination of materials. The last thing I found, there was a tree that was struck by lightning, and the bark was really easy to peel off. So this could be like shingling, like a roof, right? And once again I would start from the bottom and shingle my way up for added protection, mostly against the wind and the rain. Also, perhaps for a little bit of comfort, keep as much light out as possible. If you're trying to sleep, you know, something like this. And we just keep building it up. I would say that I've made this a little bit too wide, because there's a lot of airspace on each side, so everything would be a little bit more compressed. And if I wanted it to be wider, then I would just go ahead and increase the width of my bed. So that's mostly a preference.